So I looked it up just to be sure, and yeah guys, he really isn't a doctor. It's nuts. So the Fantastic Four movie, much like Galactus in their universe, is upon us. And while we are in the middle of the most jam-packed comic book month we've had in years, I figure we stay on trend and continue talking about something within one of these two major comic book universes in order to justify the hours of research I put into learning about the topic of today's discussion. This week's thinly veiled obsession is none other than talking about someone who I consider to be the greatest comic book villain of all time, but since no one wants to listen to me rant for 15 to 20 minutes about Egg Foo, I suppose we could follow up on a promise I made in another discussion and lend some credence to why Doctor Doom is one of Marvel's most nefarious ne'er-do-wells. Because as we know, not only is this guy the arch rival to Marvel's first family, but he's also at the center of many of Marvel's most grandiose stories, including one that they are adapting in the next couple Avengers movies, that being Doomsday and Secret Wars. And with none other than Iron Man himself, donning the mask, but with a new task. Or is it new mask, same I don't know. We'll get to that when we get to that. But we also know that this isn't the first time that this character has been brought from page to screen. In fact, Doom has been depicted in a number of different incarnations ever since he was invented all the way back in 1962. Yet for some reason, every single incarnation of this masked menace has stumbled some way before the finish line, at least in regards to his live action depictions. So like I've done before, I want to dive into the character of Doctor Doom, talk about what makes him such an amazing character, and get to the bottom of why he's so difficult to get right, as well as shine a light on some depictions of him that I think do a better job than most. So, let's discuss. So Doctor Doom, also known as Victor Von Doom, made his first appearance all the way back in Fantastic Four issue 5, which was released in June of 1962. Created by the OGs of comics, that being Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Doom was envisioned as a rival to none other than the first family themselves, the Fantastic Four. And looking back at his first appearance, it is quite impressive how many key elements of his were established right out the gate. In this first issue, the team was just going about their day, messing around, when all of a sudden the lights go out, and power to the entire building is cut. Looking out the window, they see that the entire building has been covered in some kind of electrified net, preventing them from doing things like ripping apart with the thing's mighty strength. It was also coated in asbestos, which was a common thing back in the day, meaning that burning it was also off the table. They then learned that this is all a ploy from the newest villain on the block, Doctor Doom. Riding around in his helicopter, yep, he had one of those before Thanos, and he orders them to present the Invisible Woman to him as some kind of an offering, in return to release the rest of the crew. It is while deliberating on this decision, Reed Richards informs the rest of the team that this man is no stranger, but in fact an old colleague from his days in university. You see, Dr. Doom and Reed attended the same school, and there, Doom was something of a rebel, willing to go to any lengths in order to achieve his mission of piercing an extra-dimensional barrier using whatever experiments he was cooking up in his lab. Much like Reed, he too was a brilliant mind, but his ruthless and relentless nature ended up ultimately blowing up in his face. Literally, considering the fact that the machine that he used to pierce the dimensional barrier did just that. Whilst recovering, he was expelled for wreaking havoc with his experiments. The last Reed had heard of him, he had vanished somewhere in the Himalayan mountains, looking for mystical artifacts. Evidently, this is not where he met his demise and is now back to enact his grand plot. With the team up to speed, Sue decides that they should go along with Victor's plan in order to get to the bottom of what he's trying to achieve and stop him before he can cause any more harm. So by doing what he says, they end up at his Eastern European castle, where Doom informs them that they are to go back in time and steal a treasure chest from the famous pirate Blackbeard. Yeah, this issue primarily is a time travel story, where the three guys are sent back to recover the chest in order to save Sue Storm. By using Dr. Doom's time pad, they go back, steal some clothes, infiltrate the ranks of a pirate crew, and find the chest, though suspiciously Blackbeard cannot be found. But because of the disguise they put on the thing, the pirates end up listening to him and calling him the fabled pirate of legend, thus inspiring the story that would ripple throughout the generations. In the end, Dr. Doom manages to escape using a Doombot, but the team does manage to foil his plot by dumping all the treasure into the ocean before returning. Or at least that's what he should have done. In reality, he gave it to the other pirates, so God knows what mystical powers he just provided them. Despite managing to save an untold number of lives, Dr. Doom was still out there. And that's his first story. Obviously introduces a lot of elements of this character, including the fact that he is a mad genius hell-bent on merging science and magic in order to achieve the ultimate power. It's also established that he is an old colleague of Reed Richards, who was disgraced and discarded by the scientific community. And we get to see cool things like the Doombots, the Time Pad, and a bunch of his neat and useful gadgets. From here, Doctor Doom would be a regularly appearing opponent, continuing to challenge the Four as well as rule over their sovereign nation of Latveria. Yeah, not only is Doctor Doom a credible threat to the superhero community, but he also has many opportunities to take the stand on the geopolitical front. Which, I mean, is a little far-fetched. I mean, can you imagine an evil leader of a nation in our world? Preposterous. Doctor Doom's stories would also see him becoming not just a threat for the FF, but also across the Marvel Universe, appearing in comics like Spider-Man, Iron Man, Black Panther, and Doctor Strange, as well as regularly finding him at odds with teams like the Avengers and the rest of the greater Marvel Universe. A couple of stories outside of Fantastic Four ones worth highlighting for this guy are Avengers Emperor Doom, Doom Quest, which is kind of just a run in the Iron Man series from issues 149 to 150, and one that I really enjoy, Doctor Doom and Doctor Strange Triumph and Torment. But these are just a few, since this guy was invented all the way back in the 60s, you can imagine he's been all over this company's publication. And the common through line between all these stories is Doctor Doom being an absolute menace throughout his tales. But what makes him truly tick? Well, Doctor Doom wasn't always a mad scientist in a metal mask ruling his own nation. Originally, young Victor Von Doom was born into extreme poverty in the harsh landscapes of Latveria. Born to Romani parents, his mother Cynthia was a powerful sorceress and his father Werner was a skilled healer and doctor. And what they lacked in wealth, they made up for in their connection to one another. Unfortunately, tragedy would claim his mother one day when she made a pact with the demon lord Mephisto. And in case you didn't know, Mephisto is pretty much Marvel's version of the devil, but more eccentric and goofy. You might know him from stories like Infinity Gauntlet, where he's messing around with Thanos the whole time, as well as being the guy who gave Ghost Rider his powers. He's also the dude who signed Peter Parker's divorce papers with Mary Jane. This was all to save Aunt May from a bullet wound, but considering the fact that this woman was like 103 or something, I mean, like, at some point you gotta let go. But Peter didn't, and now he's the single bachelor living a life of complete misery and suffering, all for the entertainment of people like us, who never want to see him grow up or become any more than just a sad, lonely photographer with an inability to get his life together, because I guess that's what the writers think the readers are at home. Whoa, I got a little bit vindictive there for a second. But yeah, Mephisto pops up all over the Marvel Universe. He's even been adapted in stories like Ghost Rider, where much like in the comics, he's the one who makes a deal with Johnny Blaze to give up his soul to save his father. And more recently, and spoiler alert, going in 3, 2, 1, appearing at the end of Ironheart, portrayed by none other than Borat himself, Sacha Baron Cohen. So I guess we'll be seeing more from him soon enough. Anyways, the terms of his mother's deal with Mephisto resulted in all the firstborn children within her village's lives being taken, and upon realizing this, the villagers claim her life as well. And when threatened by the men of the village that they would do the same thing to him and his father as they did to his mother, Doom's inner tyrant reveals himself as he informs them how unwise of a decision that would be, letting them know that if they were to banish his father and him from their village, or bring to them any harm, then he would truly be his mother's son and wreak a horrible vengeance upon them. For the next couple of years, Doom and his father would travel with their village across the countryside, and Victor would get something of a small bit of a normal childhood with the time they spent with this girl named Valeria, who would be Victor's first love. But even this small bit of happiness would be short-lived, when the Baron and then ruler of Latveria himself, Vladimir Fortunov, would recruit Victor's father to save his wife from a terrible illness. Sadly, things went south and the woman ended up passing away, and the elder Doom was forced to pay the ultimate price. But before he could be executed, he returned to his village to collect his son and flee into the mountains. Doom and his father would attempt to hide within the Alps, but unfortunately due to the harsh environment, Werner would suffer severe exposure while protecting his son, and when the two returned to their village, the Baron swooped in and snatched up Doom's father. And not too long after, he was executed. Yeah, talk about adding insult to injury. With both his parents dead, Victor would set his sights on the man who took everything from him, that being the Baron and ruler of Latveria. And in order to do this, Victor would hone his skills as both a scientist and a sorcerer, becoming an expert in all things that he thought could give him power. Eventually, word of his accomplishments would reach overseas, and he would be invited to attend the prestigious college of Empire State University, which you might also know is the same college that both Reed Richards and Peter Parker would attend. And luckily, or maybe unluckily for Victor, he would be attending at the same time as Richards himself. Whilst there, Victor would continue to hone his skills, as well as pursue his secondary goal of breaching the veil between our reality and the realm of Mephisto in order to locate and save his mother from eternal damnation. He would come to blows with fellow student Reed Richards, as the future Mr. Fantastic attempted to warn him that his experiment was going to go horribly wrong. But unwilling to accept that he could have possibly made a miscalculation, Doom goes forward with the experiment, and thus the story that Reed described earlier plays out as we were told. This accident would leave Victor's face horribly scarred, as well as being expelled from the academy. This would also cement a deep-seated hatred for Reed Richards, who he blamed for the accident that left him scarred and disfigured. Yeah, in case it wasn't obvious, not only is Doom an egotistical maniac, but he's also a pretty big narcissist. And in many of his stories, his biggest downfall always ends up being his extreme ego and unwillingness to accept fault. Scarred and alone, Doom would locate a monastery where he would have an armor constructed to allow him to finally enact his revenge on the Baron of Latveria, as well as conceal his mangled appearance. And we'll get to that face of his in a bit, because it is an incredibly interesting part of his narrative. Upon returning to his homeland, Doom would galvanize the people and lay siege to this iron-fisted ruler, no, not that Iron Fist, toppling his empire and placing himself as the new ruler of this country. But in a cruel twist of fate, Doom would end up continuing the oppressive rule of his predecessor, but now with himself on the throne. And this was his story as it was fleshed out by Ed Brubaker in his series Books of Doom. Another set of fantastic Dr. Doom stories that I highly recommend you check out for yourselves. There are a couple other stories that dive into this character's origin, but this one's always been my favorite. But now that you know a bit more about Dr. Doom himself, now we've got to ask the question, why is it so difficult for those adapting him from page to screen to get this tyrannical overlord right? Well, as we went over in a previous discussion, his last 3 attempts to be done on the silver screen each suffered from a series of different hurdles that in the end resulted in every one of them falling short. If I had to rank them from worst to best, the worst one would easily be Toby Kebbell's incarnation in Josh Trank's Fan 4-Stick. In case you didn't see this movie, which bless your heart if this is so, this is probably the least accurate interpretation that the character has ever seen. And in some instances it's okay to not draw direct comparisons from the source material, but in the case of Dr. Doom, you're really leaving a lot of great writing on the table. And it's not like Fan 4-Stick ended up replacing it with anything good. Here, Doom is just kind of a lame hacker dude. Someone who flunked out of the Baxter Institute, which is basically their version of Empire State University, and ends up just kind of this down-in-his-luck 4chan incel loser. He's scooped up and then thrown onto this project where he just gets lost in the other dimension, and isn't seen till the end of the film where I guess now he's the main villain. He does have this one slightly entertaining hallway scene where he's just blowing up everyone's heads with psychic blasts, but it's not worth the 90-minute slog it took to get to this point, and the payoff is somehow even more pathetic. His plan to destroy our world and rule over this desolate wasteland that looks like the remaining CGI from the Shark Boy and Lava Girl movie, but with none of the creativity, is disappointing enough, but then they had to go and throw in the blue sky laser beam from every single movie ever just to be safe. And speaking of aesthetics, they really didn't do themselves any favors by making Dr. Doom in this film look like a burnt crash test dummy with a garbage bag on his head. I think I also mentioned this before, but they very clearly did not want to use the name Victor Von Doom, originally calling him Victor Domachev in the initial scripts, but obviously ADRing his Von Doom last name in because, I don't know, maybe they thought that would save this disaster.
Victor Von Doom is on here.
So yeah, absolute failure on all parts. Not doing the character justice from the comics is one thing, but if you have to change something, the very least you can do is replace it with something interesting, and they didn't even do that. The next one I want to mention is from the 90s Fantastic Four, directed by Oli Sassoni, produced by Roger Corman, and portrayed by Joseph Culp. And in terms of accuracy, this film is clearly the best interpretation of the character, in regards to just adapting him from one medium to another.
Pitiful.
No alterations or fancy workarounds, just an Eastern European ruler hanging out in his creepy castle in the mountains with an army of henchmen at his disposal. This is also the only live-action depiction of Dr. Doom where they don't show us the man under the mask, which is in keeping with the character in the comics. And in case you didn't know, because my dumbass decided to leave that fun fact up until this point, was for a time a well-kept secret around Marvel. For the most part, we are not privy to what this man looks like following his terrible accident. At first, there were some theories and speculation floating around as to how bad the blast damaged him, ranging from complete and utter facial deformities to just a tiny little scar. And that is actually my favorite interpretation, having Dr. Doom only have this small scar on his cheek, but because he's such a perfectionist, views it as a complete and utter travesty, a mark of shame that he can't unsee. So he keeps his face completely covered, and then in an act of cutting his nose to spite his face, forges that armor of his in order to hide his shame. But instead of letting that armor cool, he immediately shoves the hot metal onto his face, further disfiguring the man. Yeah, that's the Dr. Doom I know and love. Eventually we would get a reveal as to how mangled this man's mug really was, but the most commonly agreed on look comes from the Secret Wars event, and we're getting ahead of ourselves. Back to the movie, Joseph Culp's portrayal of Dr. Doom is truly one-to-one with the source material, as much as you could do with the limited budget and technology of the time. By drawing inspiration from dictators of the past like Mussolini, it helps lend to the grandeur and opulence that this character is often written with. It's not always perfect, but it's a film I have a lot of respect for, capturing the goofy and zany attitudes of the characters, as well as introducing us to this silly and over-the-top world. Unfortunately, because of the limitations of the film, they weren't really able to truly realize this world as well as one might hope. And this can most be seen in the fact that they didn't even bring the actor playing Doctor Doom back to re-record his lines. Yeah, a lot of the time when characters are wearing masks, they'll ADR their lines in post in order to give it that feeling that they're not just speaking through a piece of cloth or metal mask.
Is the mask muffling my voice?
But that doesn't appear to be what they did here, and so they seem to use the audio they captured on set and just let that be Doctor Doom's voice.
My name is Doom.
Probably because they never intended to release this thing, so why bother putting any more work than you had to? The result is that many times Doctor Doom's just completely incoherent and kind of just mumbling and echoing his way through scenes.
A project of this magnitude must be undertaken at once.
But when it lacks in quality, it makes up for in pure comic gold.
So, my friend,
It is sad how many of these folks are putting their heart and soul into their performances, not knowing that the thing would never see the light of day, but at least dorks like me still remember it for the hokey fun adventure that it tried to be, and rumor has it some of these actors might even make a cameo in the upcoming First Steps film. But now we move on to the best depiction of this character, and that is of course from the Tim Story 2005 Fantastic Four film, followed by Rise of the Silver Surfer in 2007, with the late Julian McMahon in the role. And yeah, if you didn't hear, we recently lost Julian McMahon after his battle with cancer, and we're wishing his family all the best. Back to the film. So I've railed on these films in the past for various reasons, all of which I still think are pretty warranted, but to give credit where it's due, Julian McMahon does do a great job with the material he has to work with. Yeah, he's less evil dictator and more Norman Osborn, but in terms of aesthetics, I mean, they got pretty damn close with how he's supposed to look, and I enjoy his overall attitude and smarmy nature. His electric powers are kind of a lame nerfing of what he can actually do in the comics, which is a mixture of casting spells and summoning machines to do his bidding. But I mean, for the story that they were going for, having him be the 5th mutated person on the team does at least wrap everything in a nice little bow, even if I would still prefer the mad scientist super wizard from the comics. They do allude to the fact that he's from the country of Latveria, and in the sequel we even get to see his castle, but his status as the ruler of a nation as well as his diplomatic immunity never come into play or are even a factor in his stories. I do appreciate that in Rise of the Silver Surfer, he does have the ambition to try to take the power from the titular Silver Surfer himself, but it does just wind up with us repeating the ending of the first film with a grander scale to the action. Most of my praise goes to the aesthetics and Julian McMahon's performance, because the writing itself is nothing that special. And the fact that this is Doom's best live action outing does tell you the sorry state of affairs. And from what we can see in these 3 depictions, the main fault always seems to come down to a lack of confidence in the execution. Each of these 3 iterations had someone not trusting the decisions being made, and thus forced alterations or just cut funding entirely. The initial Fantastic Four film from the 90s never had the budget to realize what it wanted to accomplish, and then the next 2 just spent their time trying to fix Doctor Doom and make him work in the stories they were trying to tell, rather than crafting a story designed for this character. I understand some of the difficulty in trying to bring a character like this to life. Doom isn't a simple sort of villain you can just slot into any story being told. He's a larger-than-life, grandiose mastermind with the capacity to accomplish just about anything. With a nation of loyalists and an army of Doombots, on the surface he really is your standard Saturday morning cartoon villain on steroids, but with an added layer of depth and insecurities that make him so much more interesting. There's a reason why he can rival so many of Marvel's greatest protectors through either strength or cunning alone, and he can be a real bastard, willing to do some of those evil things imaginable, like exploiting Ben's insecurities about being the Thing and turning him against his team, brainwashing and manipulating the Scarlet Witch to kill her fellow Avengers, and even sacrificing the woman he loves to Demon to gain even more power. He's also just petty. Like in one instance when Sue is having her 2nd child, and she's at risk of there being a miscarriage, Doom swoops in to help deliver the unborn baby, but only under the condition that he gets to name her. And you wanna know what he ends up naming the kid after? That's right, the woman he himself sacrificed to gain more power, that being Valeria. Yeah, imagine you're Reed and Sue Richards, and you have to let the man you hate the most name your 2nd-born child, and he names her after a woman he himself killed. And the craziest part is, Valeria actually likes Doom, and goes to him for guidance. Yeah, she views him as something of a fun uncle, making Doom not just a rival to this team, but also something of an extended family member. And this complicated relationship is just something you can't capture when the scope of your film is so small. You really need to lean into the stranger elements of this world, as well as actually have the funding to pull it off. You also need to trust in the source material, because while it is extremely complicated in some aspects, when done right, it could inspire someone so menacing as the Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Vader. Yeah, Darth Vader's look and mannerisms are inspired by the comic book Doctor Doom. And this is what I mean when I say that Doom is a triumph in crafting a villain. Someone who go toe-to-toe with super geniuses, supreme powerhouses, and even gods. And with no shortage of interesting tales to draw from, the question really isn't how do we adapt this, but rather, where should we start? I think one of my favorite incarnations of the character has to come from none other than a video game of all places. That being Marvel Ultimate Alliance. This 3D beat-em-up action-adventure game from the early 2000s was not only one of my first introductions to the greater Marvel universe, but also just a fun game that I still find myself coming back to every now and again. And in it, it has what I think is the greatest depiction of Doctor Doom beyond the printed page. Here, Doom is not only maniacal, threatening, but also the most important element of his character is on full display, that being his grand ambition. Doom is never satisfied with the amount of power he has, doing whatever he can to get more in order to never once find himself in the position of that helpless boy years ago. The story of Ultimate Alliance is at the end of the day a vehicle to get you from set piece to set piece, but it is perfectly in line with the character of Doom himself, wreaking havoc across the galaxy, taking us to strange and interesting corners of this universe, always with him being one step ahead of the team. It put on display just why this guy requires so many hands on deck when he's at his full potential. Seeing him start by attacking the helicarrier, then recruiting threats across the globe from Atlantis to China, before reaching for the stars and interfering with the Shi'ar and Skrull empires, until eventually breaking into the realm of Asgard and stealing the powers of Odin for himself. I mean, this is exactly what Doctor Doom would do in the comics, and it puts his villainy on full display. It is unfortunately held back by, at the end of the day, being an ensemble, meaning that you don't really get to have that personal connection with him. He's more so just a general nuisance to the team, rather than having a one-on-one grudge with any member. But from what we see, this is the exact version of the Lord of Latveria that I'd like to see get properly adapted. That or Superhero Squad, I'd be happy with both. Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure if they're going to manage to be able to pull this off, just from the fact that they're already starting from what I consider to be the wrong foot forward. It looks like he's going to be a variant of Iron Man, and I know some people will say, no, because he's going to be Victor Von Doom, so technically he's not a variant. But I mean, Sylvie and Loki are still variants despite having different names. Hell, different faces even. And the fact that he's going to be still portrayed by RDJ means that at the end of the day, we can say that he's at least similar enough to Iron Man to warrant the comparison. And I highly doubt they're going to do a thing where they pretend he doesn't look exactly like Tony Stark. But you gotta understand, Doom and Iron Man are just drastically different characters. Yeah, they've had crossovers and hell, even exchanged names, but I do think at the end of the day, the reason why they're doing this isn't because they have an interesting story to tell, but rather they just want to get people back in seats, and what better to do that than make the main hero of the first 10 years of this universe now the villain. So even if he is Doctor Doom straight from the comics, ruler of Latveria, rival to Reed Richards, he's still going to ultimately be an extension of Iron Man. And considering how much it costs to bring Robert Downey Jr. into these things, I don't think he's going to be sticking around for very long. Meaning that if we're lucky, maybe we'll see him get recast, or he'll just go away, being relegated to maybe cameos or a headstone depending on how this thing turns out. I hope we don't end up burning the character of Doctor Doom just for a cheap cash grab, but I have no reason to suspect that's not exactly what's going to happen. Doctor Doom is one of the most phenomenal creations from the Marvel Universe. A villain to all who oppose him, and someone who in the right hands can be one of the most fearsome foes ever put to screen. He's clearly a difficult character to get right, but I do have hope that they still can pull off a win here. Despite my reservations by casting Robert Downey Jr., pushing the film back does give them a bit more time to polish things up and really execute on something special. Not to mention, having seen the new Superman movie, a similar character appears in the form of Lex Luthor, being just the ultimate hater. And seeing how well they were able to adapt this character, who in the past has been pretty much nothing more than a greedy landlord, which admittedly is a real supervillain, then maybe Marvel can pull it off. We'll just have to wait and see, and considering the fact that the team he opposes the most is appearing in theaters in just a few hours, then this is really going to be the litmus test for whether or not we're heading towards greener pastures. And if they can't pull it off, well, I guess we gotta wait another 10 years to give them another crack at it.